Hi, I'm David with Portrait Displays, and in this video, we're going to calibrate the Samsung S95F QD OLED using Calman Home, the C6HDR5000 colorimeter, and the G1 pattern source. Let's get started. I'm going to come down to my computer and launch Calman. With Calman loading, let's take a look at a couple things on the display before we get started. I'm going to come over to the remote and press the gear icon. That'll bring up the menu. I'm going to press on all settings. Let's navigate down to Support, and let's come over to About This TV. You'll notice we're on the QN65 S95F AF XZA. If we come back, we can come up to Software Update. I definitely recommend you make sure you have the latest software before performing the calibration. You'll notice we're already on the latest version of 1042. Let's come back out of the menu here. Let's press the back button again and come up to Connections. Next, let's select Network. Now I'm already connected to my network because I'm plugged in to my router. You can connect your Samsung to the network over a wired connection or the Wi-Fi connection, but it's important to make sure you're connected to the network so that Calman can talk to it over the network. Let's come down to IP settings. You'll notice I have an IP address of 10.240.2.58. I'm going to write this down on a little notes page on my computer because I'm going to want this IP address later in the video to connect to the Samsung display. I suggest you do the same. Okay, with my IP address now documented, let's come back to the display and press the back button. Let's press the back button again, and now let's go down to Expert Settings. Calman's going to talk to the display over the network, but it's important to make sure your IP remote setting is turned to on. Most displays ship with this off, so if someone hasn't turned this on already, you're going to want to do so now. We're going to come down to IP remote. It's going to allow an app to connect to it, such as Calman. We're going to turn it on and press OK. We've now got the IP remote set to on, and Calman will be able to talk to it over the network. Let's press the back button and come back out of the menu. Okay, we've now validated our model number, checked for the latest software, made sure we're on the network and wrote down our IP address, and turned on the IP remote. Let's come back to our Calman computer and see where we're at. With the Samsung AutoCal workflow open, I'm ready to go. But if when you launched Calman Home for Samsung, it didn't go to the Samsung AutoCal workflow, you can come up here to the top left menu, select Calman, come down to Open Workflow Template, choose Display Specific, and choose Samsung AutoCal. The workflow will load from there. On the start page of the Samsung AutoCal workflow, you'll notice I have an option to choose SDR or HDR. Today, I'm going to start by calibrating the SDR, or the standard dynamic range. I'll select SDR and press Next. Now we're on our session setup page of the workflow. At this point, we want to connect to our light meter. Today, we're using the C6HDR5000. We also have the G1 pattern source running behind the display. And then lastly, we're going to want to connect to our display. So let's come up here to step 1 and press Find Meter. The C6HDR5000 is currently connected over USB, and Calman found it connected to the machine. You'll also notice we have a setting right below here for a meter profile. I already have the Samsung S95F meter profile made for this display, but if it's not automatically loaded, you can click on the drop-down and navigate to the meter profile you want to use for your display. Since we're on the S95F, we'll use the S95F profile. For step 2, we're going to want to find our pattern source. We'll press Find Source. I'm going to come over to Manufacturer and choose Portrait Displays. Choose the model as the G1. You'll notice here down below, the Portrait G1 has automatically been discovered on the network. I can select it and press Connect. With our G1 pattern source now connected, you'll notice the pattern source options window has opened here in the top right. You can open and close this window by clicking on the top above. You'll also notice behind the window, there's actually some guidance on how we recommend to configure your generator. As displays vary from model year to model year and panel type to panel type, you may need to tweak these from time to time. For the S95F, I'm actually going to tweak these just a little bit, as I find I get slightly better results if I use a 10% window instead of a 2% window. Let's go back to the Portrait Displays G1 Source Settings tab, and let's work our way down the recommended settings for the purpose of this video. I'm going to set window size to 10%. I'm going to change my pattern delay to 1. I'm going to keep my color format RGB 8-bit, my output at 3840 by 2160 at 24. Range will stay in limited SMPTE video range, and I'm going to keep HDR off because I'm currently calibrating for SDR. Let's click back off the Portrait Displays G1 Source Settings window and continue through the setup page. With our G1 pattern source now connected to Calman and configured for the calibration session, let's go to step 3, choosing our calibration targets. Now, you'll notice the color space, gamma formula, and white point is set up for the default BT709, BT1886, D65 white point. Now, you'll notice the color space, gamma formula, and white point is set up for the default BT709, BT1886, D65 white point. Because this is a QD OLED and I know my black level is near perfect, I'm going to set this to a power 2.4. This will help because I have a lot of lights in the studio right now. I've got lights on my sides, I got lights above me, I got lights behind the screen. So I don't want that light affecting my black level measurement, which will then raise my EOTF curve. I want to try and track at 2.4 just as I would in a dark room with a QD OLED. So we'll set it this way for now. Lastly, you'll notice on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we have some pattern insertion recommendations. You'll notice that pattern insertion for time and pattern insertion for patch is not checked. I'm going to press enable, and that'll turn on the pattern insertion, and it'll also set the default values for the workflow. You can check those default values by looking to the right. You'll notice some SDR recommendations and HDR recommendations. With the pattern insertion now set up, our C6 HDR 5000 connected, and our G1 pattern source ready to go, we can now move on to the next step. Let's press next in the bottom right, and here we're at our pre-calibration measurements. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Calman will now put up a pattern, take a reading, and plot the data so we have a good idea of where the display was before we perform the calibration process. Okay, with the pre-calibration measurements completed, let's take a quick look. If we come over here to the RGB balance chart, we'll notice that we're tracking not too terribly, but we are a little bit minus green throughout the entire range. Our Delta E2000 on the bottom is tracking with a max error of about 4.3 and an average error of about 2.8. Not horrible, but certainly some room for improvement. If we come over here to the Delta E2000 for the color checker chart, we also have some similar errors. We're tracking about a max error of 4.2 with an average error of 2.4. And if we come over here to the CIE chart on the left, you'll notice the measurement dots are not quite in the target boxes. Certainly some room for improvement here. With our pre-calibration measurements completed, let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. At this stage of the workflow, it's time to connect to our Samsung display. We've already turned on the IP remote and we already wrote down our IP address. So let's come over to the top right and press Find Samsung TV. You'll notice the manufacturer's already set to Samsung and the model is set to a 2018 model, but the S95F is a 2025 model. So let's click on the model and scroll down to the 2025 4K. You'll notice there are some options for IP or serial. On the 2025 displays, Calman supports the IP protocol, so you want to choose IP 2025 4K. With our manufacturer set to Samsung and our model the IP 2025 4K, it's now time to enter that IP address. Go get your IP address that you wrote down earlier in the video and enter it in the box below. Once entered, press Connect. You'll notice during the connection process, an IP remote access window is going to pop up in the top right side of the display. Take your remote and press Allow. This is a security feature so malicious apps can't control the display. With Calman now connected to the Samsung display, we'll want to come back over here to the left and choose the mode we wish to calibrate. You'll notice there are several modes here on the left. Because we're connected over the network, the modes we're going to want to calibrate are either Movie or Filmmaker. They're also broken into Movie and Filmmaker for SDR and Movie and Filmmaker for HDR. Because we're doing SDR, I'm going to choose Filmmaker mode for SDR. Calman will now change the display to Filmmaker mode and we'll be able to proceed with our calibration. With Filmmaker mode now selected, we have another option we can make. We can either calibrate for regular content or gaming content. If you're a gamer and want to calibrate this particular mode for gaming content, come down to the game mode and set it to on. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to leave game mode in auto, and the G1 is going to be recognized as a non-gaming device. Therefore, we're calibrating for the non-game mode. With game mode set to auto, let's proceed to the next step. Come up to where it says number 2 and press Full DDC Reset. The Full DDC Reset is going to prepare the display into a known state for Calman to perform the calibration. Okay, with the DDC reset now complete, let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now at the luminance stage of the workflow. Here, we're going to want to set our pre-calibration luminance. We like to target about 15% above our end target luminance. We do this because as Calman corrects the display's calibration, we're going to lose a little bit of luminance throughout the process. So if you're targeting 100 nits, you'd want to set it to about 115 nits. Today, let's target about 180 nits so we end up around 150 nits in this bright environment. I'm going to come over to Calman and press Measure Luminance. Calman's going to put up a pattern, take a reading, and let us know where we're at. As you can see, we're currently at about a 229 candelas per meter squared, or nits. I'm going to come up here to brightness, and I'm going to drop this down to 20. We're now at 185 nits. Come over here to the left side, and I'm going to press the minus. We come down to 19, and we're at 179 nits. Pretty good place to start. Let's press the stop button, and let's come down to the bottom right and press next. The next step here is to do the grayscale at 2 points. The Samsung display has 2 steps for grayscale. It has a 2-point and a multi-point. We're going to start with the 2-point and get the grayscale dialed in from a coarse standpoint before moving on to the multi-point and the fine-tuning. You'll notice Calman has this recommended at 2 points at 20 and 100%. Let's use that. Come down to the bottom right, press AutoCal. The AutoCal setup window comes up. Our active grayscale points are that 2-point, 20%, 100%. We'll leave our delta E target at 0.5 and we'll press OK. Calman will now walk through the AutoCal process of the 2-point grayscale. Okay, our calibration is completed. It took 40 seconds and a total of 5 reads. Let's press OK, come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now at the grayscale multi-point portion of the workflow. Here, Calman's going to go through that fine-tuning process through the multi-point system on the Samsung display and correct both the EOTF and the white balance throughout. Let's come down to the bottom right and press AutoCal. With the AutoCal setup now on screen, we're going to leave our active grayscale point set to SDR because we're calibrating standard dynamic range. We can leave our delta E target to 0.5 and press OK. Okay, our multi-point grayscale has finished. It took 10 minutes and 32 seconds and a total of 92 reads. Let's take a quick look. So our RGB balance is tracking really nice throughout the entire scale. We do see a little dip here right around 0 to 10%. We also see that here on the EOTF chart. That could be a factor of some of the light in the room, but overall it looks very, very nice. Our next step is going to be to come up here to the CMS adjustment or color management system to perform the CMS adjustment. This is a multi-point adjustment where Calman has a singular point for each of the primary and secondaries to bring the color gamut mapping into alignment. Let's press the CMS adjustment and we're taken to the color space page. On the color space page, we'll come down to the bottom right and we'll press AutoCal. You'll notice the AutoCal setup window comes up and we're already set to the saturation set at 75, the saturation point at 75, and the stimulus level at 75. We'll leave these as the default. And we'll also leave the delta E target at 0.5 and press OK. Okay, the auto calibration is completed successfully. It took 15 minutes, 46 seconds, and a total of 101 reads. Let's press OK, and let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now on the dynamic range portion of the workflow. There's a couple ways we can approach this and a couple options we can take. Let's walk through them. You may remember at the start of the workflow, we talked about targeting 150 candelas per meter squared, or nits. If I want to just set my peak luminance target, I can come down to the bottom, press read continuous, and adjust the brightness slider until my peak luminance measures 150 nits. You'll notice we're measuring around 136 nits. I come over to the brightness slider and press plus to bring this up to 150. Okay, we're now at a brightness setting of 22, up from 19, and we're measuring 151 nits. I'll come down to the bottom and press stop, and simply move on if we want to continue with our post-calibration readings. However, it's important to note that when Calman calibrated the Samsung display, the display didn't have the super white information or the information above white. Now, many workflows don't require the information above white, but if you'd like to have the super white information or the excursion above white, we can go through a process here on this page to bring it back. Now let's come back to our workflow, and you'll notice here in the top left, we have clipping with peak white, clipping, or black plus clipping. I'm going to set this to clipping with peak white and come down to the bottom and press read series. Calman is now going to measure the display going above white to see how it's performing. You'll notice here on the left, we're starting to hit a clip. We're coming up tracking this yellow EOTF line on the left, and then the gray measurement line is falling off and not tracking with that yellow peak. In an ideal world, if we want that super white information, we're going to want to track with that yellow line. Now what that means is in order to do that, I'm going to have to bring down my contrast control. So we'll come over to the contrast control here, that's at 45, and we'll bring it down just a couple clicks. You know what, let's go down to about 40. And now we'll press read series. This is a very iterative process. You're going to measure and adjust until you hit your target. Okay, we're now at 40, we've measured the EOTF, and we can see very much at the top here, we still have just a little bit of clipping. So I'm going to bring this down another, let's say 3. Go down to 37, and I'll press read series. Okay, We may notice that we went just a little bit too far, as we see now the gray is above the yellow line. So I'm going to come back over to contrast and bring it up to 38 and measure again. Again, you'll want to repeat these steps until you get it exactly where you want to. Okay, so I've gone through a couple iterations here and I found about 38 is where I want to be, give or take maybe 1. But now you'll notice my peak luminance is at 208.2 nits, and I was targeting 150 nits for my peak white. So we're going to come back over to the bottom here, and you'll notice there is a 100% window. I'm going to put up the 100%. You'll notice the peak luminance is at 166.1 nits, so we'll come back over to that brightness and bring that down, let's say 2, and make another reading. Okay, we're at 155.5. Let's come back down to that 19. All right. At brightness 19, we're now at 150.3 nits. I can come over and hit read series again, see how I'm tracking that yellow target line for my super white, and then move on when the results are satisfactory. Okay, we're tracking that yellow target line as we would expect based on the measurements we've taken. Let's come down to the bottom right and press next. Now it's time for our post-calibration verification. So let's come down to the bottom right and press read series. Okay, our post-calibration verification is completed. Let's take a look. If we look over here at the RGB balance chart, we're tracking that grayscale really nice around the center line with RG and B all balanced right on top of each other. We look at the Delta E2000 on the bottom, very low values across the board. If we come up here to the grayscale performance, we'll see the average error is of 0.6 with a max of 1.3. If we come down to the bottom left, you'll see the Delta E2000 for the color checker, all really low across the board with a max error of 1.9 and an average error again of 0.6. If we look at the CIE chart on the left, the measurement points are right in the targets pretty much across the board. This came out very well. We have our super white, we have our 150 nits at 100% white, and we're tracking both color gamut, grayscale, EOTF really nicely. Now let's come down to the bottom right and press next. On this page, we can actually see our pre and post comparison. On the top, we have our pre. You'll notice that we were going minus green if you remember, and we're going a little magenta on the top end, with a max error of 4.3 on the grayscale, now at a 1.3, and an average error on the grayscale of 2.8, now at a 0.6. If we come over to the color checker, you'll notice once again we were at a max 4.2 when we started, we're now at an average 2.4, and post-calibration we're at a max 1.9 with an average of 0.6. All very good improvements for the Samsung display. Now we have a couple options. We can save our data and close out our calibration session if we'd like to, or we can move on to HDR. Let's move on to HDR so we can walk through that process. I'm going to press Calibrate HDR. This is going to take us back to the session setup page of the workflow, but now we're optimizing for HDR. We're already connected to our fine meter, so we don't have to touch anything there. We're connected to our source, but we are going to want to put the pattern generator into HDR mode. So we're going to come up to Portrait Displays G1, select it, come down to HDR, and select HDR10. We can leave the rest of this at default. I'm still going to leave my window at 10%, and I'm going to leave my pattern delay at 1 for now. Next, let's come back over to the left. We have our targets is Rec 2020, ST284, D65 for BT 2020 HDR. In the bottom right, we also have some pattern insertions. I'm actually going to reload the pattern insertion so that it loads the default settings for HDR. I'm going to press disable and then press enable again. You'll notice the pattern insertions now are checked and the values are updated for HDR as on the right side of the screen. Let's come down to the bottom right and press next. We're once again on our pre-calibration measurement page section. Let's come down to the bottom right and press read series. Okay, our pre-calibration measurements have completed. Let's take a look. Here on the RGB balance chart, we're tracking PQ what looks to be fairly nicely until we get up to around 30%, and our grayscale has a little bit of a color shift, once again going towards magenta. If we look at the Delta E2000 values, we are starting to go off, especially as we get up to that top end of the grayscale. Our average error is 2.8, our max error is 6.7. If we come down to the color checker, not too terribly bad here, but we are having a max error of 6.5 with an average error of 1.8. And again, if we look at that CIE, our measurement points are not quite hitting those targets that we strive to do. So let's come down to the bottom right and press next. Now we're on the connect to Samsung TV portion of the workflow, but we're already connected to our Samsung TV. In fact, when we set the G1 pattern source to HDR, the display's already gone into that HDR mode. So at this point, we really just want to choose which HDR mode we want to calibrate. Since we calibrate SDR for Filmmaker, I'm going to select Filmmaker HDR. That'll align Calman with the display settings. Once again, I'm going to leave my game mode in auto, come up here and press full DDC reset to get the HDR mode ready for calibration. Okay, with the Filmmaker mode HDR now reset, let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now once again at that grayscale 2 point, but in HDR, we're actually going to do 30 and 80%, as you can see here on the top right. I'm going to come down to the bottom right and press Auto Cal. The Auto Cal setup window has come up. We're going to keep it in 2 points, 30 and 80%, and press OK. Okay, our 2-point grayscale has completed. It took 1 minute and 25 seconds and a total of 12 reads. Let's press OK, come down to the bottom right, and press Next. Now we're at the grayscale multi-point portion of the workflow, but there's a couple things I want to discuss with you here. Let's come up to the top right. You'll notice there's a year and a model. The Samsung displays have different multi-point systems depending on the model and the year. We're going to want to choose the year that we're working with, which is 2025. We'll press Select and bring it down to 2025. Next, we'll want to choose the model. We know we're working on the S95F, so I'll press on Select and choose S95F. But we're not quite ready to perform the calibration just yet. I want to see where my EOTF is tracking before I press that Auto Cal button. You'll notice we only have the 100% white. So I'm going to come up here to the top right, press the gear icon. This will open the Workflow Basic Options page. On the grayscale points, let's choose something that'll give us a good idea of how the EOTF is tracking. I'll come down to 21.5% steps 0 to 100%. You'll notice in selecting that, we now have our EOTF chart on the left, and we have the points along the bottom. With these now loaded, let's press the read series. Calman's going to go through the process of measuring the EOTF before we correct it. Let's get some clarity on why we want to do this. I'm going to bring over the whiteboard, and let's take a look at what's going on in Calman. We have an X and Y chart similar to this, and we have an EOTF chart that's tracking like this. Okay, so we have a multi-point grayscale system we're going to use to try and correct the EOTF. That means we have so many points of adjustment. We have a point here, point here, point here, point here, point here, right, all the way up to peak white. But we only have so much range on each one of those adjustments. So we might be able to go plus 50 in this direction and minus 50 in this direction. That might seem like quite a lot. However, they're really, really fine adjustments so you can really tune the display. Because of that, we want to make sure that we're tracking really closely before we start to do the adjustment. If we're pretty far off from the adjustment before we start to track, we're going to find that this isn't tracking very well, or it won't be able to correct for it. So let's come back to the computer and see how the display is tracking before the adjustment. Okay, it looks like we're clipping a little bit in white, as we can see a color shift here at the top end. We also have the EOTF going a little bit high here, as we can see on the RGB balance chart with luminance. And we can also see that if we look at these EOTF charts where we can see this gray line not quite tracking exactly where we would like it to be. But overall, it's actually not too terrible. So let's come over to the DDC controls in the top right and click on the tab. I'm going to arrow over until I get to display controls. With the display controls loaded, you can see all the controls Calman's able to adjust on the display. For the purpose of this section of the tutorial, we're going to focus on the contrast and the gamma setting. You can see our EOTF is not tracking this yellow line. We're coming out a little too bright, but we can also look at this with luminance chart and we can see the RGB balance is not quite right here at the top. We have a magenta shift. So in order to try and pull it a little bit out of clipping while also bringing that EOTF closer to the target, I'm going to reduce the contrast. I'm going to come over here from 50, I'm going to take it down to 45. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to come over here to the top left and open up another history in Calman so we don't lose what we just measured. Come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, the measurement is completed with the contrast now set to 45. As you can see, we've shifted that RGB balance a little bit in the opposite direction regarding the EOTF. If we look at the EOTF chart, we can also see that the gray is not quite tracking perfectly with the yellow. I'm going to adjust the contrast and maybe even the S95F gamma until I get this pretty close. I suggest you do the same with your own display. Okay, so as you can see, I've adjusted the contrast here in the DDC controls to about 48. And with the DDC control at 48 and the S95F gamma mode set to 0, we're getting a pretty well tracked PQ curve, but we're still having that clipping near white. So I have a couple options here. One, I can leave this where it is, which isn't really my preference, or I can try to correct it with the 2-point or the multi-point. I don't think my multi-point is going to have enough adjustment to really get this right. So I'm going to go back to my 2-point and see if I can get this a little better. You can either do this manually or you can press the back button here on the bottom right and you can run through this 2.30 and 80% again. Let's press AutoCal, and let's see where that 30 and 80 takes us. Okay, with our 2-point completed, let's press Next and take another look at that multi-point grayscale page. I'm going to open up another history on the top, and let's press Read Series. Okay, so our grayscale is tracking really well, which it was before. We didn't fix that peak white, which again we were adjusting about 80, but it does look like we're coming out of black just a little better on this EOTF, and we are tracking it really nicely. I still don't think I'm going to have enough range to fully fix that peak white with the multi-point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the DDC, and I'm going to make a subtle adjustment. Right now my R gain's at -2 and my B gain's at -4 with my G gain at 0. I'm not going to touch the G gain because I don't want to push that in the clip. So I'm going to come to the red gain, I'm going to drop that 1, I'm going to drop the B gain another 1. Let's take another reading and let's see how this tracks. It may affect other parts of the grayscale, but it should bring in that top end so we don't have as much error weighted on one side. Okay, so we can see we are getting some improvement here, but we're not quite there. If you're experiencing the same thing, I encourage you to go through the iterative process of trying to dial this in a little bit more. Okay, so I've made a couple adjustments. Let's come up to the DDC. All right, my contrast is at 48, my brightness is at 50, my gamma is still at 0 for ST2084. I've now got my red gain at -4, my B gain at -6, and my red offset and green offset are at -1. We're tracking that PQ curve really nice. We have a little error here near black, but not dramatic. We're tracking that curve really nice all the way up. You can see this on the with luminance RGB balance chart, but we've started to move that error away from peak white and starting to move that down through so we have a nice average. That means I'm going to be closer for when I try to make an adjustment with my multi-point. So I have a couple options here. My deltas are pretty good and my HDR is tracking really nicely. I could just call this a day and move on to my next step. But if we want to see if we can get this better, we can run the multi-point. Why don't we give it a shot? I'm going to come back over to History 1 and leave my History 3. I'm now going to come down to the bottom right and press AutoCal. The AutoCal setup window is now prompted on the screen, and you can see our active grayscale points are set to HDR 20.B. Calman knows exactly what points to use because you set the year and the model at the top of the workflow. We're going to leave our delta E target at 0.5 and press OK. Calman is going to run through that AutoCal process and see if we can get this just a little bit better. Okay, let's take a look. The RGB balance is tracking really tightly all the way up until we get right near that white point. Our delta E 2000 with luminance, very low. Without luminance, very low. Tells me that the error is in the color, which is what we're seeing on the charts. We're tracking that EOTF really tightly all the way throughout, and we fix that error near black. You can see we're tracking really tightly all the way up to here. Now, you'll notice that we jump right here on the bottom left. What's happening is we're now in the data set to calibrate the multi-point, and it goes from 75% to 100%. So what you're seeing here is the 75% measurement and then jumping to that 100% measurement. If we use the other data set, you'll see that track more as we would expect, and you wouldn't see this jump right here. So there's a couple things we can do. We can continue to try and balance this out and see if we can get this a little tighter, which I do think we can. I've worked with this set a few times in a couple situations now, and I have been able to get this better. Or we can move on. It's really up to how much time and energy you want to spend in really dialing this in really nicely. If we come up here to the DDC controls on the top right, notice we're still at that 48. We've only taken that contrast control down by 2, and our ST24 is still at 0 for these results. Now, if I press the arrow to the right and I arrow through until I get to my multi-point grayscale, we can take a look at how much adjustment was done at each stage to see if we have any room for more adjustment. So we're on the RGB adjust, and we can see that at the bottom end, we've pushed up a little bit to fix that bottom, and we're almost maxed out because these go up to +15, we're at that +48. At the top end at 75.3, we still have a little bit of range here. We're not really pulling on anything too hard until we get to that very bottom point of the adjustment. So what this tells me is I can continue to adjust this white point with my gains, and the rest of this should fall in line if I want to do this again. So if we run back over to display controls, we can come back down to the R gain and B gain, and we can take them down maybe just another click. Let's do that. Let's open up another history here. We'll go back to History 2, and let's hit Read Series on the bottom right. Okay, so if we look at these results, we can see that our white hasn't really improved very much. we maybe need to take out another red here, but we're also seeing a little bit of dip in the middle. Now that means we're going to need to have multi-point adjustment that can bring that back up if we start to go down this path. So it's really an iterative process. You want to make sure you get that white as good as you can while you're tracking in the rest of it without running out of range. Eventually, you're going to run out of range, right? We're probably affecting that bottom in just a little bit, and we're at that 48 on the bottom now, so we can't bring it very much more up. If we bring that SD28 adjustment down a little bit, that'll bring our curve down, but that means that we're going to have to push it back up on another side. We'll probably run out of range on the bottom end and maybe even start running out of range on the top end. So the calibration is really about that iterative process. How can I get these adjustments to work together to get me the most accurate image according to system standards throughout the entire range? We're really, really close to the way we were before. I can come back here to DDC, maybe take out that red, but I think we're going to start to see a little more error. And I'd also want to go through that multi-point again in order to see where this really ends up. Let's take out that red and let's hit read series. Okay, so taking out that red, running it again, it's got us a little bit closer at this top end here. We're really starting to see this come in. We're starting to see that red hit, and we're only getting a little bit of error here on the red in the middle. We are getting a little bit of that luminance dip because the more we pull these down, the less luminance we're going to have, the more we're going to start to undertrack that PQ curve. What I could do now if I really wanted to, so I could go to the DDC, arrow over to the RGB adjust, hit reset grayscale, which is going to reset these values, press yes on the prompt, and then I can do this again. Now I've adjusted that white point a little better. Knowing about how well I can get this, the auto calibrating is going to try and bring this back in. Now keep in mind, there's some heating, there's some cooling, there's a little bit of ambient light in here, so these might fluctuate a little bit throughout. Eventually, you're going to hit a really nice target. I'd actually argue that we're actually very, very good in the grand scheme of things when we look at these values and how well we're tracking. But we always want to get a little bit better, so why not try? I'm going to come back down to the bottom right, press auto cal, and press OK. Okay, our grayscale auto cal completed successfully. It took 21 minutes and 40 seconds and a total of 188 reads. Let's take a look. We'll click on OK. As we can see, we still have a slight error here right at 100, but we're very, very, very close. And we're tracking that EOTF curve really nice. We haven't run out of that range yet. We're tracking really, really nice, no unnecessary roll off, and we're getting right up to that peak. Let's come back to history 1. You can notice from last time, we had a little bit more split there with the color and our delta E was higher, so we've improved that. If I come over to the DDC in the top right, you'll notice that we're now just about maxing out that bottom end still. We're at 50, 50, 48. Our mid-range is not too terrible, and our 75.3 is tracking well. So we might be able to just tweak this just a little more, but we're sort of on the edge of that, but I wouldn't be too concerned with where this ended up. I'd like to continue with the calibration. So we have a couple options here. One, we can move on to the next step, which gives us our post-calibration readings without doing the CMS adjustment, or two, we can perform the CMS adjustment and then move on to the post-cal readings. Because the CMS and HDR doesn't always improve it throughout the entire range, I'd like to measure the post-calibration verification first, see where my color gamut is tracking, then go back, try the CMS, and compare those results. Let's come to the bottom and press next. On the post-calibration verification page, let's press read series. Okay, if we look at our post-calibration verification readings, we can see we're tracking this EOTF really, really nice, but we do have a little bit of color shifting here. Now, if you look at the scale, we're pretty tight on this chart, so the errors are very minor. If we look down on our Delta E2000, we've got a max error of about 1.9 with an average error of 0.9. Very, very good considering we're in HDR. If we come down to that CMS Delta E, we are seeing a little bit more error here. Now it's improved from pre-calibration because we've got our EOTF and our grayscale tracking much better, but we still have a max error of 3.9 with an average error of 1.6, and you can see our points are not quite in the boxes. So as I mentioned before, let's go back one page, and now let's do the CMS adjustment. Click on CMS, we're going to be taken to the color space page, and now we can come down to the bottom right and press auto cal. We're at 50% saturation, 50% saturation point, 50% stimulus, and a delta E of 0.5. We'll keep those settings and press OK. Okay, our calibration completed successfully. It took 23 minutes and 6 seconds and a total of 158 reads. Let's press OK, and let's come down to the bottom right and press next. We're once again on the post-calibration verification portion of the workflow. Let's come up to the top left and hit plus to open a history 2, so we don't have to lose our other results while we measure these new ones. Let's come down to the bottom right and press read series. Okay, our post-calibration verification is completed. Let's take a look. Once again, our RGB bounce is tracking really nice all the way up to that top where we have a little bit of that color fringing, which again, if you want to do that iterative process we walked through with the 2-point and the multi-point, you could probably get this a little bit tighter based on what we were seeing. Our delta E's are still pretty low. We've got a max error of 1.8 and an average error of 0.8. So we come down to that color checker, we've got a delta E now at a max 3.2 with an average error of 1.2. We're still a little bit undersaturated in some of these target points, but we are lining up with those target points. Just about every single measurement is hitting the target box, if not already in that target box. So the errors are spread throughout and we're tracking really, really nice here with some nice improvements from where we started. Let's come down to the bottom right and press next. All right, here we are on the pre and post comparison. If we look at the pre-calibration on the top, we're tracking pretty well up to that 30%, right where we were when we started the calibration. As we come down, we've got a little less green and we're going towards that magenta. If we come over to the color checker, we have a max 6.5 when we started. We're now at a max 3.9. We had an average of 1.8 and we now have an average of 1.6. We've improved across the board there. If we look back over at the RGB delta E's, we had a max 6.7. We're down to a max 1.9. We were at an average 2.8 when we started with an average of 0.9 now. There you have it. We've calibrated the Samsung S95F using Calman Home for Samsung, the C6HDR5000 colorimeter, and the G1 pattern source. We hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you on the next one.